Okay, it is 1:30, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the virtual Common Hour. My name is Anna Anderson, and I am the director of the Spanish Writing Center and a proud member of the Common Hour Committee. First, I'd like to introduce our ASL interpreter, Emily Phipps. Thank you, Emily. We are very happy all of you are here with us. The Common Hour is a 10-year-old academic program that brings the entire Franklin and Marshall community together weekly for culturally and academically enriching events and historically pizza during the academic year. It is the only regularly scheduled event that brings all of the F&M as well as the local community together. We continue our tradition of gathering weekly as a community to share this common experience and continue the conversations. Next week's Common Hour features Kathy Berger with a talk entitled Fear and Loathing in Our Discourse, Dangerous Speech and What to Do About It. This Common Hour event was proposed by Eve Brotman in the Earth and Environment Department. This semester, we are featuring virtual pizza servers. This week's group is F&M Votes, whose faculty, staff, and student coalition members are helping to get out the student vote for what may well be the most important election of our lifetimes. If you are registered to vote with F&M's address in Lancaster and are voting with a mail-in ballot, follow directions carefully to fill it out and put the ballot inside the 2 provided envelopes. You should hand deliver it to the voter registration office drop box downtown, located on East Chestnut Street. Do this as soon as possible. It is too close now to mail it. If you plan to vote in person next Tuesday at the Lancaster Theological Seminary poll on the corner of College Avenue and West James Street, the poll is open 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. and you just need your F&M ID as long as you are registered to vote at the college's address. There will be representatives from F&M Votes there all day to answer questions outside the poll. Please read the F&M Votes webpage for information and please vote. There will also be food available for purchase at the Pepper Theo Cafe at the seminary from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. We will have Q&A at the end of the hour. Students, staff, and faculty can submit questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window throughout the hour. We won't identify questioners by name, but please tell us in the Q&A if you are a student and what year you are, or for faculty and staff, what department or office you are in. And now I'd like to introduce Rachel St. Louis of the class of 2021.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel St. Louis, and I am a senior government major and a history minor. On campus, I am a member of Sisters, the public relations officer for the Model United Nations Club, co-president of the Black Student Union, and president of the College Democrats. I'm excited to introduce to you all today Dr. Lindsay Hayes. Dr. Hayes has served as a writer and communications consultant in the White House and U.S. Senate for a cabinet-level agency and on 2 presidential campaigns. Dr. Hayes received her master's degree and PhD in political communication from the University of Maryland, where she taught communication courses for over a decade. She holds a bachelor's degree in political science and communication from Boston College. Dr. Hayes currently serves as the president and CEO of Free the Facts, an organization that I'm proud to be an ambassador of, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that provides young Americans ages 14 to 35 with reliable information about the economic and fiscal policies, programs, and challenges that will impact their lives. College Democrats and F&M Votes are proud to co-sponsor today's Common Hour, aptly titled Free the Facts and a Conversation about an Informed Election, as Election Day is less than a week away. We hope that you walk away from today's Common Hour feeling more informed and excited to participate in the democratic process. Without further ado, Dr. Lindsay Hayes.
Hi, it's so nice to join you. Let me first thank Rachel and Jessica for inviting me to speak, and thank Rachel for that wonderful introduction and for being a tremendous ambassador for our program. We were fortunate enough actually to visit Franklin and Marshall last year before we entered into this whole period of the pandemic, and it was an exceptional experience for our team to be able to come and visit with the Franklin and Marshall community. On that night, we talked about Medicare, which is typically what we do. So today is a little bit different than the kind of events we usually hold, but I think very important. And I'm really grateful to Jessica and Rachel for giving our organization and specifically me this opportunity. I did a call with Jessica and Rachel last week to prepare for this event, and I know how passionate they are about getting students involved in politics and public policy, and how successful they've been. It's pretty remarkable, actually. I could not be more impressed with your voter registration initiative, F&M Votes. My understanding is that in 2012, you registered 55% of students on campus that fall. And of those who registered, a staggering 87% voted on election day. I mean, that by any standard is a huge achievement, a huge accomplishment, and something that the Franklin Marshall community should be very, very proud of. And I think it provides a good jumping off point for our conversation, because nothing demonstrates how special Franklin and Marshall is, how special this initiative is, than the fact that there are so few programs like the ones that you run at Franklin and Marshall, and like the Common Hour on campuses across the country. What I want to go ahead and do first is I'm going to share my screen, and I think we should probably do some introductions. So you now know a little bit about me, but you don't know a ton about the organization that I am responsible for and the amazing team that I'm responsible for leading. So we actually are going to give you a sneak peek. We're running events during the fall semester, virtual events, because we can't be on college campuses this year. And we're using those events to talk about 3 different themes. The first is civic education and engaged electorate. Tonight will be our second event in that series. The second theme, which happens the week after Election Day, is going to be about healthcare. We're doing 3 events around healthcare. And then finally, we'll be doing 3 events around student loans, and then a wrap-up event for the semester. And so I thought it would be great. We start every virtual event with a video. The video that we have for this evening for our theme dovetails really well with our talk today. So I thought it would be great if we gave you a sneak peek at what people are going to see tonight. So I'm going to show you a quick video, talks a little bit about our organization and then our efforts in civic engagement with the RAND Corporation.
So Free the Facts is in a really unique spot as a nonprofit organization whose main focus is education.
When we started, we had this really modest goal. All we wanted to do was go out and talk to people ages 18 to 35 and make sure that they had reliable, objective information about some of the big policy challenges that are going to face them.
Well, Free the Facts started as an idea, which was to bring this sort of objective, nonpartisan, fact-based information about tough issues to students around the country.
There's a lot of information regarding policy that's being circulated here in DC that isn't really being made accessible to students on campuses.
We're creating spaces and we're providing information so that people from all different backgrounds can come together and have a conversation. We're not here to tell people what to think. We're just here to make sure that they can. People actually are really willing to get together and have difficult conversations, and they just lack the spaces and the resources a lot of the times in order to make that conversation happen.
We want to be the key piece in that funnel that takes, the students that want to create change and giving them the opportunities and experience so that they feel empowered to create that change.
We have to take on the mantle of change now. Eventually we have to pass that on to someone, and they should have it now, especially when this is like your first time being able to vote and being able to be a part of this country for real, by voting. Like, shouldn't you know the information? Shouldn't you have the tools you need to do that?
If you're interested in our ambassador program, our internship program, or our scholar program, visit us at freefacts.org and let's get to work.
Today, when you go online or turn on the TV, there's no shortage of opinions.
Leadership. The president has had the chance every second of every minute.
And there's no shortage of arguments.
Fake news president Jeff Zucker. That's just the price of being a public official.
But there is a huge shortage of facts, or at least facts we can all agree on. Researchers at the RAND Corporation, a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank, call this phenomenon truth decay. Truth decay is what happens when four bad trends combine to create an especially toxic political environment. 1. More and more people disagree over basic, well-established facts. 2. They begin to lose sight of the very distinction between fact and opinion. 3. They rely more and more on opinions and anecdotes instead of objective data. And 4. They no longer trust credible sources of information. This isn't the first time we've seen truth decay in our country. In fact, throughout our history, there have been several times when increased polarization has led to deep cultural divisions and fierce political arguments. But unlike in those eras, today's truth decay isn't getting any better, and there's plenty of evidence to suggest that it's going to keep getting worse. This is a result of a variety of factors, but heightened by round-the-clock news and an increasingly polarizing political climate.
The analysis, but if people don't care, if they're not interested, if they actually would rather just be right or rather just hear something that makes them feel good, then it doesn't matter.
Unless the next generation takes action.
How do we convince people that facts really do matter?
And that's why Free the Facts is working with people like Michael D. Rich, the president and CEO of the RAND Corporation. He spent over 40 years at RAND, and he's the co-author of its 2018 report on the spread of truth decay. Under his leadership, RAND is launching a number of endeavors to bring back facts and analysis to public policy making.
And so I've committed RAND to take the lead and do what we can to restore facts and analysis to their rightful place as the cornerstone of public decision making.
And tonight, we'll hear from him how the next generation of leaders can find workable solutions that fight misinformation, build trust in our society, and protect our democracy.
So there you go. There's your preview of the Free the Facts presentation for this evening. And if this, what we're going to talk about today, interests you, hopefully you'll join us. But I did want to go ahead and just get started with my portion, which is going to build on that. And essentially, I think this is the work that we're doing with RAND is really important when we're talking about any time of year, but particularly around an election year. So what I want to walk through is first we're doing our introductions. Then I want to invite you to do some audience participation, which is a little odd over Zoom, but we're going to try to make this work. And then talk a little bit about the challenges and then my modest proposal for what I think could be a potential solution going forward, which is strengthening deliberative democracy. So to get started, obviously tonight we're going to be talking about misinformation in public policy and democracy. And obviously the Common Hour and Franklin and Marshall are very interested in those kinds of dialogues. This is one part, as I said, of what Free the Facts is doing. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan 501c3 organization, and we're really committed, to put it simply, to getting America's brightest minds working on our biggest problems. We pride ourselves on providing good, reliable information so that people can become engaged and empowered citizens. And we always explain to people, we don't tell you what to think, we just make sure you can. But of course, that's a really challenging thing to do these days. And part of that is that the foundation by which we have these conversations and we engage in deliberative democracy, a lot of that foundation has corroded. And I want to talk a little bit about that with you, and mostly by way of illustration. So we're going to do audience participation, the at-home edition right now, and either get out a piece of paper and you can mark down your answers to these questions, or I know that Josh is going to be putting in the poll section, you can actually register your answer to these things as I go. But I'm going to give you 10 questions that were actually part of the Pew Research study, looking at kind of how effective media is and how effective consumers of that media we are when it comes to public policy. This actual test was taken by over 5,000 Americans in 2017. They don't have an update for it for this cycle, post this cycle yet, but they will. But it should give you a little bit of an indication of what we're up against. So here we go. We're going to go through these 10 questions. The following statement has been taken from a news article. Regardless of your knowledge of the topic, if you were to read the statement in an article, would you think it was, 1, a factual statement, whether accurate or not, or 2, an opinion, whether you agree with it or not. And so I guess we have in the poll, we have true and false. So for true, put a factual statement, whether accurate or not, if you believe that it's an accurate statement and it's factual. I'm sorry, not accurate. If it's a factual statement, whether accurate or not. And for false, go ahead and just put opinion. Let's sub those things in. So let's get started. So the first question on the Pew survey is Barack Obama was born in the United States. So you want to mark true in the poll if you believe that is a factual statement, or you want to mark false if you believe that it is an opinion. All right, so first is Barack Obama was born in the United States. The second is increasing the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour is essential for the health of the US economy. Again, true if it is a factual statement, whether you believe it to be accurate or not, and false if you believe it is an opinion, whether you agree with it or not. Question 3, government is almost always wasteful and inefficient. Question 4, immigrants in the United States illegally are a very big problem for the country today. Question number 5, healthcare costs per person in the United States are the highest in the developed world. Question number 6, ISIS lost a significant part of its territory in Iraq and Syria in 2017. Question 7, spending on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid make up the largest portion of the US federal budget. Question 8, immigrants who are in the US legally have some rights under the Constitution. 9, abortion should be legal in most cases. 10, democracy is the greatest form of government. So these are 10 actual questions that were asked of over 5,000 Americans by the Pew Research group. And what they went through is they asked them again to say, are they factual statements, whether you agree with them or whether you think they're accurate or not, or are they opinion statements, whether you agree with them or not. So the answers for those playing the home game are question 1 is factual, question 2 is opinion, question 3 is opinion, question 4 is opinion, question 5 is factual, question 6 is factual, question 7 is factual, question 8 is factual, question 9 is opinion, and question 10 is opinion. And so you may have gotten all 5 in both categories right, and that's great. But I think, and that wouldn't surprise me actually, because I know that Franklin and Marshall is a very engaged campus. And I also know Franklin and Marshall education teaches you to think critically and to kind of decipher from fact and opinion. But one of the things that I think is alarming is that when we look at the results that Pew got, only 26% of the people who participated could accurately identify the 5 factual statements. And only 35% could accurately identify all 5 opinion statements. And this is one of these examples that Michael Rich and Rand has talked about. They're all kind of emblematic of the difficulty that we're having. There's a lack of faith in our institutions, including our media institutions. There's a lot of blurring of fact and opinion on a lot of our news platforms, which feeds into that problem and makes it even more difficult. There's a deluge of information, and because of expanding media technologies and access, and it's great that we have access to more information than ever before, but it's really hard to distinguish, especially when we have competing data points, which one are we supposed to believe? And so this has had a corrosive effect on democracies. I want to talk a little bit about the challenge. The challenge is not just a challenge for the entire nation. The challenge is also a really big challenge for the group of Americans that our organization, Free the Facts, specifically engages with. And that's individuals who are between the ages of 14 and 35, with a real emphasis on the college age demographic. We talk about some alarming statistics. There's a lot I could pull out of here, but the ones that I specifically want to draw your attention to are these. In the millennial and the Z generations, so specifically that demographic that we typically work with, there are some alarming statistics that we've seen that really contribute to perpetuating a lot of this truth decay that we've seen over the last several years. In 2017, there was a study that was done by Tufts University, and they found that 60% of millennials who are in rural areas live what they would characterize as a civic desert. That means they have little, if any, access to the institutions that foster civic engagement, things like youth programming, culture and arts organizations, religious congregations. And so one of the things that's happened is that you wound up with an atrophying, right? They never really get into the zone of actually exercising that deliberative democracy muscle, because there's just simply very few institutions in their geographic region that provide those kinds of opportunities. The second statistic is this one that says 25%. So a lot of people think that the answer to solving all of America's deliberative democracy problems is just that students should take a civics course in high school. But actually, most college or most high school graduates in the United States do take a civics course. 90% of high school students are required to take some form of civics by the time they graduate as a condition for graduation. But it's very patchy across the country. We don't really have a uniform curriculum. And so one of the things that, that we found is that only 25% of graduating high school seniors in the United States can actually pass or be proficient on the NAEP civics assessment. And again, when we talk about civics education as being kind of that foundation for all of us to have the democratic conversation we need to have to make decisions about how to move forward, that is troubling. We also have looked at a study that came out that asked students graduating from college in 2018 if they felt that they were prepared to actually act as independent thinkers, to ask and find answers to critical questions. And only 27% of college graduates that year said that they felt prepared to do that, which of course is an absolute prerequisite to being an engaged citizen. And then finally, we've really burdened a lot of our college students because, you know, they don't have time to shore up a lot of these gaps and go out and seek information. They don't have time to go out and kind of figure out innovative ways to help the country shore up this lack of information and this lack of civic engagement, or to run for office or participate in public life on their own, because a lot of them are crushed under crippling student loan debt. The average graduate in 2018 had $29,000 in student loans, which, depending on what your major was and what your job prospects look like, can be a pretty overwhelming figure. But it's not just that this generation, these two generations specifically have a problem, or that the country has a problem on the whole in terms of its civic engagement and its deliberative democracy. We also are asking the millennial generation and Generation Z to tackle really big challenges in the future. As I said, the student loan crisis, which is, these happen to be the areas that our organization really focuses on, but the student loan crisis is a $1.56 trillion crisis in America. Social Security is scheduled to kind of reach insolvency. So it's going to be sending out more in benefits than it takes in 2035. For Medicare, that's much earlier, 2026. And by next year, and of course, COVID has a lot to do with all of this, by next year, this Congressional Budget Office projects that the national debt will be larger than the economy. And so we've got a lot of really tough challenges that we have to figure out how we're going to get together and resolve. And unfortunately, I think the situation that we've handed to the next two generations, the millennials and Generation Z, we haven't really fully equipped them to solve those problems. And so we need to start thinking about what might be a good solution. And that's something that we spend a lot of time working on at Free the Facts, is how do we strengthen deliberative democracy? So I know that there's an election coming. We are a 501c3 organization. We are nonpartisan. So we don't have a position on specific candidates or specific parties or, you know, any specific ideological views that are going to be on the ballot. But I would like to make a modest proposal, which is I would urge you to rethink Election Day. And what do I mean about that? what I'm asking you to do is to consider an election victory more broadly. I am asking you not to think of it as a win for one candidate or one party, but a victory for the country, a victory for our institutions. What is a victory for our democratic processes? So what does a successful election look like in terms of not just candidates and parties, but in terms of the citizenry more generally? And I think you guys are onto something at Franklin and Marshall, right? Because the first characteristic of an informed election would be that people understand and know how to exercise their right to participate in that election. They know where to vote. They know when to vote. They know how to register. And they know what to do if that right of citizenship is denied. They know how to appeal that process. And so I think you tend to see a lot of the education efforts around an election year, particularly a presidential election year, focused on this question of how do you register and how do you make sure that people have the information they need to get out and exercise the right to vote. I think the second characteristic of an informed election is that the people know what's going to be on their ballot. So they don't just know the candidates, they also understand the duties and the responsibilities of the offices that those candidates are seeking. Essentially, when a candidate is running for public office, right, they're filling out a job application. They are looking for you to interview them and to put down your vote as a yes for them to get that job. And so you have to know what the job is. And so I think that's an important piece of this ballot question, but also the implications of any ballot questions or referendums. A lot of times you'll go to the polls, you'll show up only to find out, wait a minute, there's a referendum on this ballot and I don't necessarily feel like I have a lot of information to vote on it. So being able to know about those issues beforehand and get informed about them and actually vote on them. And then there's this other category, which I'm going to admit is a little bit murkier, but I think it's an important third characteristic. And it's a place where I think as a country, we don't do so well right now, in part because we're in one of these truth decay phases. That would be having reliable and factual policy information to help inform our choices. And there's a lot of important hard work that goes into getting voters the first two types of information, getting citizens access to that information. And so that's why I want to talk about the third, because that's where a lot of our focus as an organization is. All right, so I want you to bear with me for a moment, and I want to ask you to start thinking of Election Day, not as the kind of, only moment on the calendar, but kind of think of Election Day as if it's the Olympics of our civic life and democratic process. And what happens on that day, how specific people perform, who wins, who loses, that is important, but it is almost completely the result of how we prepare as a democracy. So as the saying goes, right, athletes are made in the off season. And if you want to be an informed citizen, then it might help for us to take a note from a decorated Olympian. And specifically, I'm thinking of Michael Phelps. So Michael Phelps is a 5-time Olympian. He's been to 5 Olympic Games. He has 28 medals. 22 of those are gold. He has 39 career world records. And he actually, there was a lot of controversy, but during Shark Week in 2017, he raced a CGI shark, and he didn't win against the great white, but the reef shark, he came in 2 seconds faster. So I think that's a pretty good measure of success. If you can beat any kind of shark, CGI or otherwise, I'm going to listen to how you train. And going into the 2008 Olympic Games, he practiced every day, not practically every day, every day. He was in the pool for 5 years. He did not take a single day off. And Anderson Cooper, actually of CNN, once pressed his coach on this in an interview. And he said, there was an exchange, and Anderson Cooper says, even Christmas Day? And Coach Bowman said, nope, we trained on Christmas. And he said, even his birthday? And Coach Bowman said, oh yeah, that's a given. We trained twice on his birthday. So this is an example of somebody really committed to trying to be good at what it is they're being asked to do. And I saw this and I thought, well, this is maybe a little bit extreme. I mean, every single day, why do you have to be in the pool every single day for 5 years? And Phelps actually explained this in an interview. And he said, in the sport of swimming, if you miss one day, it takes you 2 to get back to where you were. And according to Phelps, swimmers lose the feeling of the water if they stay out of the pool, and their muscles get out of rhythm. And they lose the feel of the pool. They lose the rhythm, their muscles atrophy. And I think the same can be said of a citizen who does not regularly get in the pool of deliberative democracy. And so the question is, are we fit enough for the standard? Are we in shape enough as a country to deliberate tough issues? And I think because we're in this period of truth decay, we aren't meeting that test. And so the question now is, well, what do we do about it? So at Free the Facts, we have this goal, and the goal is that we want to strengthen both sides of the civic equation. We're not just focused on the people who are running for office or are going to be in elected positions on both sides of the aisle. We're also really focused on making sure that citizens have good information. So a win to us, a country that looks like it's strong and it's ready to make good decisions, good choices on election day. It's ready to fully participate, not only in campaigns, but in the everyday acts of civic engagement. Is a country that has engaged citizens that are prepared to tackle tough problems. They know those conversations have to be had. They are able and willing to participate in an informed debate, even if that participation in the debate only involves critical listening and using that information to help form their own opinions. And they understand the implications of the public policies that are going to be out there for us to discuss and decide on. We're also interested in helping emerging leaders, and we want to find people who are principled problem solvers, who can rightly identify what the major policy issues are and have principles that guide them in the development of solutions. We also need coalition builders. We need people who are willing to reach across the aisle and engage in conversation with people who may not agree with them or who may not have experiences that are like theirs in order to come to better understanding. We need people who are willing and have the political courage to lead on tough issues. And sometimes that's going to mean losing an election in order to advance a cause. And we also are really looking for leaders who are innovative in the area of creating public policy solutions. They have new ideas, not the same old ideas. They know that staying true to your principles, staying true to your values, that doesn't mean that you have to stick with one policy agenda. There are lots of ways to fulfill your principles and to stay true to who you are and what you believe while still advancing the best interests of the country in the public policy space. So what can we do? Well, I think the first thing is, as citizens, we can break the bubble. And I think, there's been a lot of research that's been out there about how we're all kind of sectioned off, particularly because of the new media that's available. It's easier than ever to get in a space with people that you agree with and only have exposure and a diet of factual information that reaffirms that. It doesn't really tell the whole story or the other side. So I think we want to seek out information that challenges our worldview. That doesn't mean we have to change it, but it does mean that we're going to be able to make a more informed decision because we will have considered both sides and we will come out thinking, okay, now I've really tested what I believe and it has passed that test. I think we want to encourage enhanced media literacy. We need a lot of education in this country about what makes up a reliable source of information. And as we saw from the study results, what is a fact and what is opinion? That's not to say that you can't have a debate about facts. As a matter of fact, in my former life, I used to teach public policy debate at the college level. And we would talk about this, that there are 3 different levels of debate. There's a policy debate, which is what should we do? There's a value debate, which is, a debate about values and what you think is best and kind of the ideas that you hold dear. And then there's a factual debate. And there's lots of places where we have debates about facts. We have debates about facts in scientific laboratories. We have debates about facts in courtrooms every single day. But it's not good if democracy is stuck in first gear and we can't get out of the factual debate level, kind of come to some agreement about what is generally credible and what we're going to use as the foundation for decisions about value and policy. And so I think we need some enhanced media literacy, and I think we need to be thinking about how to make those distinctions and get to a place where we can be working off of at least a similar script in terms of factual information. Along those lines, I would say seek out primary sources. When in doubt, go to the original source. If there is something that is coming up in the public discourse, for example, the confirmation hearings for Amy Coney Barrett, there was a lot of discussion and debate about that. And you could get your news through mediated sources. I actually decided to sit down and just watch the hearings wall to wall, which is a commitment. But at the same time, I'd rather see for myself and know for myself what I think about this Supreme Court justice nominee than to hear a lot of opinions of other people who watch that primary source information. So I would say seek out your primary sources. And if you're wondering what's reliable, or you're wondering where to get facts, or you're wondering where to get those kinds of primary sources, I think you have no better friend than your librarian on your college campus. Your libraries are filled with people where they have devoted their lives to help figuring out how to sort through the information that's available and find what you need. So that library that's on campus isn't just there for term papers. It isn't just there for finals to study. That library is actually a tremendous resource for civic engagement. And I would encourage you to take the opportunity of being on a college campus and having access to those people in that institution, because it can make you a better citizen. I would also say that I think we need to redefine what success looks like. And I actually got this idea from a study that was run out of Stanford in their Deliberative Democracy Institute. They brought together a bunch of voters from all across the country. There were over 500 of them. And they put them in a ballroom in a hotel. And they had them engage in this lengthy experiment where they got together and they read factual information about lots of different policy issues. And then they got together and they didn't try to arrive at consensus, right? What they tried to do was figure out what are workable agreements. We live in a pluralistic society. People have lots of viewpoints. And one of the wonderful things about America is that we have the freedom to believe lots of different things. But I think being able to exercise that muscle of getting in a room and working with one another and not putting the standard out there as the really elusive and very hard to achieve complete consensus among the entire group, and shifting that to a perspective of what's a workable agreement on this problem that we all can live with without sacrificing who we are and what we believe and what our values are. I think that's a more constructive way to have the conversation, realizing we'll come back and we'll have that conversation again and again and again, because that's what deliberative democracy requires. And then finally, I would say engage in activities that strengthen deliberative democracy. And here I will give a shameless plug for Free the Facts. We hold events on college campuses. Typically, we would be on your campus this year working with Rachel. We run events where we bring policy experts to campus who know the ins and outs of a specific really complex public policy challenge. And we give students the ability to have about a 20-minute intro about, okay, what are the major parts, the major overview, almost like a cram session, right before you're taking the final exam. Here's what you need to know. And then we give them a lot of space to ask experts, okay, well, what if we did this? And what if we thought about it that way? And use those experts as a sounding board. And I think that's really important. And it's really important for us to show up and to add information to the discussion, and then create spaces where we're free to have that dialogue and that exchange back and forth and figure out what each of us believes. I think book clubs can be wonderful for that, as can campus events, and also your college classroom. You know, you have this wonderful opportunity. When people talk about college being the best years of their life, for a lot of us who are nerds like I am, and kind of, and really curious about ideas and really seeking to be educated, the great thing about college was actually that you got to be in these classrooms with knowledgeable people and with people whose backgrounds and experiences among your peers were different than your own. And for some of us, that was the first time we really got out of the places that we came from and were exposed to other experiences, other ideas. And so I think using those classrooms as an opportunity, not just for learning, but to engage in that civic dialogue is incredibly important. And it's a wonderful opportunity that you have for 4 years at Franklin and Marshall. With that, I will wrap it up. I'm happy to take any questions that you guys might have. But again, I just want to say thank you so much to Rachel and to Jessica and to the Common Hour, to the faculty and the administrators at Franklin and Marshall. We have loved working with the students at Franklin and Marshall. It is absolutely a very, very special place. And we can't wait to be back on campus, and we're buying pizza when we come back. And we can't wait to share pizza and have a deliberative democracy moment with all of you.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. So we do have a couple of questions that have already come in. As a reminder to those listening, if you have questions, please submit them in the Q&A. So the first question is from a faculty member. How did we get into this situation of truth decay? And if we do manage to get out of it, how do we keep it from recurring?
Okay, well, let me give a shameless plug that the person who has all the answers to that is probably Michael Rich, who's from the Rand Institution, who wrote this amazing book, which is called Truth Decay. And actually the book, I happen to have a hard copy because I got on a plane and went out to see Michael, so he gave me one. But there actually is a copy, a PDF copy on the Rand website where you can download it and just read it on an iPad or on your computer. I would say that what the book generally says, and I tend to agree with, is that we tend to wind up in these periods of truth decay where there are kind of either cultural or political or economic changes that really shake up the kind of faith in our institutions. So think about the period of the industrial age, where you have this major economic shift that is highly, highly disruptive to people in the country. And what you wind up with is that kind of calls into question lots of other things, and it leaves people really vulnerable to a lot of the kind of insidious forces that create truth decay. So I think, you know, in each of these cases, the thing that really has managed to get us out of it has been the citizenry itself. You know, people who are standing up either in their various professions in journalism or in public service, or citizens who just choose to be very, very engaged. That's always been our greatest strength as a country. And I think that's our way back from this. The exact solutions are going to look different depending on the historical period in which you're operating. So for example, you know, we're having to deal with one of the contributing factors to truth decay that no other generation has had to deal with, which is social media. And, you know, there's the old expression, you know, a lie can put on its sneakers and travel around the world several times before the truth can even, you know, pop out of bed and get dressed. It's usually the stuff that is not factually accurate is very sensational. It's more interesting to people because it's very dramatic and it kind of shocks you. And so it's really easy to have it spread. And I think we are going to have to start making some decisions. And you've seen, frankly, a lot of the social media companies grappling with this. Twitter, you know, now trying to flag certain tweets, or Facebook, you know, trying to create standards for what can be posted and what cannot. I saw recently, I think that they shut down political advertising for the last several weeks of the election. So I think we're starting to grapple with this. I see little shoots of hope kind of coming up through the concrete, but we're not there yet. And I think it's a conversation that we all probably need to have about what kind of work are we willing to do. The one other thing that I would say is we do need really good leaders in public life. I mean, the leaders are the people who have the loudest voices in this conversation. They typically literally have big microphones in front of them. And I have just been so incredibly impressed by the young people that we've met across the country. And I hope more of them will consider public service as a career. It's interesting, there's a lot of studies out there that actually indicate that people in the millennial and the Z generations are really reluctant to throw their hat in the ring. And I think that's probably a rational response. There's a lot of polarization. It's It's slow to change things in political life and in public life and in government. It's much easier to go to a tech company and where they're moving fast and they're innovating and have a really immediate impact. But that slower work of democracy, I hope more people will sign up to do it, because I think there's not just one thing that's going to kind of restore truth or restore, truth, I think, is a bit of a misnomer. I think more in terms of deliberation and deliberative democracy and conversation and productive solutions. And I think we can get there. And I see the signs out there that we're moving in that direction. But it sure would help if we had a lot of young people, like the people I've met at Franklin and Marshall, who, I think are incredibly civically engaged. And I've had great conversations with a lot of them. If when they graduate from college, they think about public service in some way or form.
Thank you so much for that, Lindsay. The next question is from an anonymous member of the community. And it says, how can we encourage young people to stay engaged and motivated in issues post-election, whatever happens?
I think it comes with this broader sense of, again, elections are an inflection point, but they're an inflection point in a conversation that we've been having forever, and that's going to continue after the election is over. They're just a moment. They're just a snapshot. And it's interesting. My former life, I was a speechwriter, and I like to joke with people, this is the one time of year every 4 years that anybody kind of cares what I have to say, because I get all these calls from the media, and their big thing the last 2 cycles has been they want to talk about concession speeches. And so I've been listening to a lot of the presidential concession speeches over the last couple of weeks, and it's a little bit of a depressing exercise, but it's also a really hopeful exercise, because you realize that even in defeat, here are people where they've been up for the biggest, most important job. They had all of these huge plans. They've got tons of people that support them. They feel like they've let them down. And yet they express all this tremendous faith, and they're encouraging in the process and in these institutions, and they're encouraging their supporters, just keep on going. Don't give up. I thought, there was one in particular, and I'm not going to name candidates because we're close to an election. I don't want anyone to feel like I'm being partisan by singling out one side or the other, but there was one that from the 2000s that I thought was really good, and it was a presidential candidate who said, don't feel like your votes and all this work that you did was in vain. Yeah, we didn't win this time, but all of that is basically advancing the cause. Like, it just so happens that when the election was held today, our ideas didn't win the day, but that doesn't mean that they won't in future years. But that's up to you, and you have to keep going. And I think that's one of the things that I really like as a speechwriter, frankly, about concession speeches, is that it is really depressing if you're somebody who's been very active in this election, and what happens next week doesn't go your way. Trust me, I've been on campaigns. It's pretty depressing and sad, but I think the work of democracy demands, and the work of citizenship then demands, that you take a week, you feel kind of low about it, and then you dust yourself off and you get going again. If the ideas that you believe in, if the causes that you serve, if they are worth it to you, if they are worthy, they are way more important than one election.
Excellent. Thank you, Lindsay. The next question is, so let's say there's a young person in this community who is weighing running for office or getting into public service. Where or how should they start?
They should start by becoming an ambassador for Free the Facts. One of the things that we do in our program that I'm really proud of is we like to take people who, we serve everyone. We serve students who want to be more engaged citizens, and they want to think more critically about public policy, or they're looking to be more informed, whether it be for voting or other civic activities. But one of the things that I'm the most proud of is, regardless of what side of the aisle a student is on, regardless of what political party or what policy they support, we want to be here for them. we see ourselves as an incubator of talent, of the kinds of people who have a servant's heart and good ideas and are inspired to lead. And actually our leadership programs are very much geared so that if people are thinking about public service, we want to be the place that helps move them into the position where they can do that. And we, without regard to party. I mean, I'm just interested in seeing more and more people who are smart, energetic, and care about the future of the country and passionate about a set of issues that can benefit a lot of people. I'm interested in seeing them get into a position where they have an opportunity to do that. So one of the things that we do is, we run our ambassador program, and you have to apply to become a college ambassador. But we have other opportunities for our ambassadors. For example, we run a paid internship program, but it's a part-time internship program. So when students come to Washington, D.C., we have them work for us about 3 days a week. We pay them because your work is valuable and you should not be working for free. And we also provide them with housing. And that way they don't have to worry about anything except maximizing their opportunity about being in DC and going out and meeting people who are maybe young people who ran and ascended to elective office, going to events, networking with people who may be helpful if they're interested in running someday. We're also happy to make introductions. We have people on both sides of the aisle in our organization. We have a lot of people from both sides of the aisle who advise our organization. And so a lot of times we're able to make those connections for our students. I want to run in Pennsylvania. Great. Let me put the call out to our folks and see who we know there so that you can start to have a conversation, get the information that you need to start on your way. So we kind of look at ourselves as we're almost like a lily pad. We're that space in between. Okay, you think you have the idea that you want to run, or you want to embark on a project, you want to create a nonprofit, you want to do something that's going to improve public life for everyone. Great, let's get together and let's have that conversation. And the first step for us is come in, be part of the organization and be an ambassador with us. And that allows us to open up a lot of our resources to help you.
Excellent, thank you. So the next question is, do you think that this election will be a game changer in terms of young voter participation levels? And regardless, what do you think the landscape will look like in 5 to 10 years?
Does anybody know what's 5 to 10 years? It's like, lately it's like 5 to 10 minutes. Right? I'll do my best. I do think that this has been a landmark year, or is shaping up to be a landmark year in terms of young voter participation, and nothing can make me happier. On the election side, there's always been this, this kind of old belief that, it's great you have the enthusiasm of young voters, but young voters don't vote. So on election day, that enthusiasm won't translate into results at the polls. And I'm so excited to see the millennial and the Z generations kind of showing people up and saying, not so fast. We're here and we came and we're engaged. And it's really, it's surprising to a lot of people that I know in politics, but I don't find it surprising at all based on my work over the last 3 years on college campuses. Because anybody who works with our organization can tell you that the people who are kind of in the 14 to 35 demo, they are on the ball. They are incredibly engaged. They're very passionate about a whole range of issues that frankly they've been responsible, I think, in a lot of ways for putting things on the public policy agenda that, 5 years ago, and this is why I say it's almost impossible to predict 5 years from now, 5 years ago would have been unthinkable. Criminal justice reform, people toiled, for criminal justice reform, in a very quiet way for years and years and years. And yet I have to say, I really do think that this 14 to 35 demographic has really, kind of championed that issue and has refused to let go. In other words, typically what you see is there will be an issue and it kind of pops into the public consciousness. And then we get a major piece of legislation and then that's kind of the end of it. It kind of deflates the movement because everybody's thought is, well, okay, we've achieved this major milestone. And when I talk with students on college campuses, they still put criminal justice reform right at the top. And they, we talk a lot about, we actually have a wonderful person on our team who's been doing some work in this area. And, we talk about, okay, the original legislation was meant to be the first step. So, and I really think that it's people 14 to 35 who are saying, well, where's the second one? And so I have to say, I think anybody who counts out the youth vote is making a huge mistake. This is not a young generation like previous generations. This is not this is a generation, I think, that understands that being an engaged citizen is not, it is marching, it is reading, it is being active, it is engaging in your community, it is volunteering, and it is also voting. And I think that they have a very comprehensive view of their roles as citizens in the world. And it's probably part of the reason why I have a lot of friends who work in partisan politics who are kind of depressed. And I'm that annoying, optimistic person who thinks we're going to be just fine. But I think that has a lot to do with who I've been hanging out with.
Love that. So the next question is, starts with a comment and then turns into a question. We hear so much about the negatives of social media in creating harsh partisanship, understandably. But other than engaging young people, what do you see as some of the benefits of social media in the civic engagement process?
So I will say, I'm going to take this question, but I'm not really on social media. So you have to take this from the perspective of someone who has very limited interaction with social media. I mean, as a communication scholar, I will tell you, I think social media is like any communication technology. It's good at certain things and it's not great at other stuff, right? I mean, this platform that we're engaging through, this is unbelievable. We're all able together, but it's not the same thing as us being in a room together. And this presentation, well, wonderful. And hopefully you think it was wonderful. And I brought some video. It's not the same as you watching television, right? It's not the same kind of programming experience. So I think it starts from the perspective that these platforms, they have strengths and they have the weaknesses. And I do think that one of the weaknesses is that it's created a bit of a wild west, and there's information flow, and there's not as good of sources, source checking and fact checking. And to the extent there is fact checking, I think that actually can be really discouraging for people in this sense that you kind of get, I think there's a feeling that people eventually have, which is, well, what can I trust? I read this fact and then I read a fact check that it's not accurate. I read this fact and then they pull apart the study that it came from and it's not accurate. And I do think there's a certain exhaustion and fatigue that people who try to be really good consumers of information have when they're getting their news and information from social media platforms. But that said, I think it's been an incredible asset in the first two things that we talked about in terms of an engaged electorate. So if we're talking about what a successful election looks like, and what an actual informed election looks like, it's not as good about talking about the nuances and the complexities of public policy issues. It's not great at getting people who are of very different backgrounds and experiences to connect and find some common ground so that they can at least debate issues civilly. It's not great at that, but social media is really good at getting out information like where you should vote. It's really good at helping troubleshoot places where, and we'll see this, I'm sure, on election day, where there are problems at the polls and people aren't being allowed to vote, or there's really long lines and they shut down the polling locations. And, in years past, before you had that reporting function where citizens could almost act as journalists, it would be days later and we would find out, oh, that polling location shouldn't have shut down and there were people waiting in line and they weren't allowed to vote. So I think there are some things that social media, it gets a bad rap, but I just think we have to treat it not like it is the answer to everything that we need in our democracy, either in terms of information or deliberation, but it is one tool, and it is a tool that has strengths and it has weaknesses. And I think this is part of that media literacy conversation, is talking about what these platforms can do well and what you need to watch out for and maybe not rely on them for. And I think one of the strengths, I will say that I also think one of the big strengths of social media, I was on a panel last week for the University of Virginia, and this was all about new media, which again is kind of ironic because I'm not really on social media. But one of the things that I do think is really interesting, and I've noticed it in particular with this kind of 14 to 35 demo, is that it used to be that people didn't have as good an understanding of the modes of production behind content. And what I mean by that is, if you look at the older era of news media, when you had 3 major news networks, right? Like this is before CNN, before MSNBC, when you just every night your news was primarily, you'd get a weekly news magazine, you'd get a daily newspaper. If you didn't have time to read all of that, then what you had was at night a summary with an anchor sitting in a chair doing 30 minutes of national, and then probably followed by 30 minutes of local news on your local channel. Well, that period of time, people had a lot of faith in those institutions, actually, but in those media institutions. But there was a lot of gatekeepers, and those gatekeepers had a very specific perspective. They fit a very specific demographic, and there wasn't as much of a nuanced kind of conversation about what made it onto the news to begin with, what stories were worth covering, what perspectives were worth sharing. So I actually think that one of the really great things about social media is that it's made everybody a creator, everybody a journalist, everybody a publisher. And because of that, I find that people 14 to 35, well, they may have a harder time kind of sorting through the deluge of information that comes out of that process. Part of it is because they know what goes into that process. So they're always questioning. There's always this critical thinking going on of like, okay, I see that argument, or I see that number, or I see that piece of news, but what don't I know? What aren't you telling me? And so, in terms of the media literacy stuff, people 14 to 35, because they actually are participating in those modes of production themselves when they're posting and when they're putting content out there, I think they view it a little bit differently than people 35 and older.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. This was such a great talk, and we could listen to you all day, but it is 2:30, so it is time to wrap up. So again, thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Franklin and Marshall, for inviting me. I can't wait to come back and buy pizza for everyone.
Looking forward to it.
Take care.